The discovery of gold at Sutter's mill in Coloma, January 1848, sparked the California gold rush. Remembered as a pivotal moment in American history that led to unheard of levels of migration, along with economic growth. The gold rush quickly filled California with thousands of prospectors from all over the United States and the world, collectively referred to as 49ers, fueling the rapid growth of cities like San Francisco. In addition to hastening California's 1850 admission as the 31st state, this flood of fortune seekers made a substantial contribution to the idea of manifest destiny and a larger westward migration. In terms of economy, the gold rush sparked expansions of financial institutions, infrastructure, and industries. In terms of society, it united the disparate groups, though frequently at the expense of the Native American communities that suffered hardships and displacement. Furthermore, the landscape of California was impacted for a long time by the environmental consequences of mining operations. As a representation of opportunity and aspiration, the California gold rush has left its impression on the country's expansionist narrative and shaped the cultural and economic landscape of the American West. And hello, dear viewer, here we are again, back doing a little bit more American history. I hope you're enjoying it. I know I am. So, you know what to do the whole like, comment, subscribe thing, and we can begin now. And we begin as early as the 9th of March 1842, some 8 years before the traditional start of the California gold rush, where gold was found at Rancho San Francisco, located in the mountains north of modern-day Los Angeles. Now, a native of California, Francisco Lopez, stopped on the bank of a small creek while looking for stray horses. This is roughly 35 miles northwest of Los Angeles and 3 miles east of what is now Newhall. And it was there that Lopez made a very lucky discovery. A tiny gold nugget in the roots among the bulbs of some wild onions he dug up while the horses were grazing. The right time, in the right place, I suppose. He discovered more gold after searching further. Lopez brought the gold to the appropriate authorities, who verified its value. Lopez and others started looking for additional stream beds in the area which might contain gold deposits. They discovered a number in what is now Ventura County, in the northern eastern part of the forest. But after that, a little bit of the gold, after being shipped back to the more established United States, nothing really happened. It received very little attention. Near his first discovery, he discovered gold again in 1843, and up until 1846, Sonoran Mexican miners worked the deposits. Before 1848, Mission Indians also made small gold discoveries in California, but nothing to really spark a rush. Well, of course, when you find gold, you don't want everyone else coming, so to prevent this, the locals told them to keep the location a secret. But then, the military conflict in Upper California resulted when the Treaty of Cahuenga was signed in January of 1847, 9 months into the Mexican-American War. James W. Marshall discovered gleaming metal in the tail race of Sutter's mill, a lumber mill he was constructing for the Sacramento pioneer John Sutter, close to Coloma on the American River, on January 24th, 1848. Marshall then showed Sutter what he had discovered, and the two tested the metal in private. Of course, Sutter was shocked when the test revealed that it was indeed gold, and he wanted to keep the news all to himself because he was afraid of what would happen to his plans for an agricultural empire in the event of a gold rush. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which officially ceded California to the United States, was ratified on the 30th of May, and with that, the Mexican-American War had come to an end. It was peacetime, at least for a while. People were going to have to find something else to do with their time. In order to secure the mineral rights of the land where the mill stood, Sutter sent Charles Bennett to Monterey in February 1848 to meet with Colonel Mason. That was the top U.S. official in California at the time, after swearing everybody involved at the mill to the utmost secrecy. Bennett was supposed to keep the news to himself, but unfortunately, he blurted it out when he heard about the coal discovery near Mount Diablo while he was stopping in Benicia. The cat was well and truly out of the bag now. He proceeded to San Francisco, where he was once more unable to maintain the secrecy, and again blabbed the whole plan to everybody. They should have chosen a better person to keep that secret. At Monterey, Bennett disclosed the gold discovery again, and Mason refused to render any decisions regarding land and mineral rights titles. So not only was the entire trip a complete failure, with Mason just not giving what they wanted, but that also completely ruined the plan of keeping everything to secrecy. What an idiot. Oh well, what's done is done. Samuel Brannan, a merchant and newspaper publisher from San Francisco, verified the discovery by March 1848. Brannan quickly opened a store to sell supplies for gold prospecting, and while he walked the streets of San Francisco with a vial of gold in his hand, he reportedly shouted, "Gold, gold, gold from the American River." And that ought to get some attention. The first significant East Coast newspaper to report on the discovery of gold was the New York Herald, which did so on August 19, 1848. In a speech to Congress on December 5, 1848, U.S. President James K. Polk affirmed the discovery of gold. Consequently, people who wanted to profit from the gold rush, later referred to as 49ers, started traveling from other nations and regions of the United States, of course, to the gold country of California, also known among the miners who were on their way there as the Mother Lode. His workers fled in search of gold, and squatters seized his land and stole his cattle and crops. Sutter's business plans were, as he feared, completely destroyed. But hopefully he'd find a little bit of gold himself. That might make up for it. Before the rush, San Francisco had been hardly a blip on the map. A small settlement, nothing really going on there. But when the Hoos found out about the discovery, it initially turned into a ghost town with shuttered business and shops, but as merchants and newcomers came in, it really began to kick off. In 1848, they had about 1,000 people living there. Not quite derelict. But by 1850, there were 25,000 full-time residents. Miners resided in deck cabins, from derelict ships, wood shanties, or tents. The rapidly expanding city, however, lacked churches and religious services. So missionaries like William Taylor filled the void by holding services in the street, with a barrel head serving as his pulpit. Fair enough, you do what you can with what you got, don't you? His sermons, of course, drew large crowds, and as soon as he had enough kind donations from prosperous gold miners to construct the first church in San Francisco, that is exactly what he did. There were no simple routes to California, unfortunately, during what had been called the first world-class gold rush, and 49ers encountered hardships and frequently died en route. The majority of the Argonauts, as they were called, initially traveled by sea. It would take 4 to 5 months to sail around the tip of South America from the east coast, covering about 18,000 nautical miles. Another option was to go to the Panamanian Isthmus Atlantic side, traverse the jungle for a week in canoes and mules, and then wait for a ship bound for San Francisco on the Pacific side. Additionally, there was a route that began in Veracruz and went across Mexico. These transportation companies brought enormous wealth to their owners, including those in the United States. The Mail Steamship Company, the Accessory Transit Company, and the federally subsidized Pacific Mail Steamship Company were among them. The overland route, especially the California Trail, was used by many gold seekers to traverse the continental United States. Typhoid, cholera, and shipwrecks were among the deadly risks associated with each of these routes. Steamship travel from New York City via overland portages in Nicaragua and Panama, followed by steamship return to San Francisco, was largely responsible for the early years of the Russia's population growth in the San Francisco area. Many eastern seaboard ships required their passengers to bring kits, which were usually filled with personal effects like guidebooks, tools, clothing, etc. The Argonauts also brought with them other supplies, barrels of salt pork, rice, biscuits, cured beef, in addition to their personal belongings. Depending on the steamship they were on, passengers could fish off the edge, have fun on deck, smoking it up and conversing with one another. Engaging in other activities too. It's a very good way to network when you're stuck on a ship for a couple of weeks. But ironically, despite the fact that segregation between wealth disparities was prevalent throughout the steamships, gambling was the most popular activity. The rich and the poor were kept apart in every way, however. Of course, to get to California, you could pay for varying degrees of travel. First class, stowage. You could probably just try and hang on to the edge of the ship if you were that desperate. The routes of the less expensive steamships were, of course, typically longer. But on the other hand, passengers would reach California more quickly on the more costly ones, so time is money, especially when there's only so much gold in the ground. You'd want to get there before anybody else. I mean, they call it a gold rush for a reason. One would think you would be rushing to get there, right? When people traveled together, there were obvious social and economic differences, because those who spent more money were given accommodations that others were simply not. They would obviously want to set themselves apart from those who couldn't afford those accommodations by demonstrating their superior class power. In order to meet the demands of the expanding population, supply ships brought goods to San Francisco. Many ships were turned into stores, taverns, hotels, warehouses, and even jails, when hundreds of them were abandoned after the crew simply left to work in the goldfields. Of course, they may as well repurpose the ships. A lot of them were planning to make their money on the frontier, build a ridiculously large house, and then just live out the rest of their days. Of course, many want to go home too, but you gotta do something with the ship while it's sitting there in the harbor. Of course, many ships were also demolished and turned into landfills as the city grew and new locations were required for construction. And so, within a few years, there was a significant but little-known influx of prospectors into what is now Siskiyou, Shasta, and Trinity counties in far northern California. Thousands of gold seekers traveled up the Siskiyou Trail and across the northern counties of California after gold nuggets were discovered at the modern location of Eureka in 1851. Beginning in the spring of 1848, Californians themselves were the first to rush to the goldfields. These individuals included native Californians, some Californios, Spanish-speaking Californians that is, and mainly agriculturally oriented Americans and Europeans living in Northern California. At that time, they were simply referred to in English as Californians. Families made up the majority of these early miners, and everybody pitched in. It was pretty common to see women and children of all ethnic backgrounds banding alongside the older men. In order to accommodate the influx of men, some enterprising families established boarding houses. In these situations, the women frequently brought in a steady income, while their husbands looked for gold. At first, news of the gold rush spread slowly. People who lived close to California or who learned of the news from ships traveling the quickest routes from California were the first people to go and look for the gold. Several thousand Oregonians who traveled the Siskiyou Trail were the first significant group of Americans to arrive. People from the Sandwich Islands and thousands of Latin Americans, including those from Peru, Mexico, and even as far away as Chile, arrived next, both by land and by ship. And the Argonauts, as they were called, by the end of 1848, approximately 6,000 of them had arrived. That year, only a handful, probably less than 500, left the United States by land. The earliest gold seekers were sometimes called 48ers because they were able to amass a substantial quantity of readily accessible gold, sometimes amounting to thousands of dollars every single day. No wonder they wanted to keep it a secret, right? The average daily gold finds made even by the average prospectors were 10 to 15 times the daily wages of a laborer on the East Coast. It was possible to earn the equivalent of 6 years' wages back home after working for 6 months in the gold fields. And some wanted to launch businesses in California. Others just wanted to get rich and then go home with it. Word of the gold rush had spread globally by early 1849, and a huge influx of merchants and gold seekers started to arrive from almost every continent. In 1849, Americans made up the largest group of 49ers, arriving by the tens of thousands via various sailing routes and overland routes across the continent. Many East Coasters managed to cross the Appalachian Mountains by boarding riverboats in Pennsylvania, pulling the keel boats to wagon train assembly ports on the Missouri River, and then following the California Trail in a wagon train. Numerous others arrived by the Pacific Mail Steamship Company's steamships and the Panamanian Isthmus. Ships carrying Hawaiian newspapers brought the news to Australians and New Zealanders, and thousands of people were afflicted with gold fever from these places, boarding the ships for California. Latin America, especially in the mining districts of Mexico near Sonora and Chile, was the source of many 49ers. In 1849, a small number of Asian merchants and gold seekers, mostly from China, started traveling to Gumsan, which means Gold Mountain in Chinese, which is the Chinese name for California. Well, at least in the old Chinese rendering, at least. Nowadays it's different. It's Jiujinshan, I believe. Jiujinshan, which is like old Golden Mountain. It's either Los Angeles' name or... Yes, I believe that's the name of Los Angeles, Jiujinshan. Well, with a greater distance to travel still reeling from the effects of the 1848 revolutions, the first European migrants started to arrive in late 1849, primarily from France, but then there were a small number of German, Italian, and British immigrants as well. About 90,000 people, half by land, half by sea, are thought to have arrived in California in 1849. Between 50 and 60,000 of these were probably Americans, with the remaining coming from other nations. But at least 300,000 immigrants, merchants, and gold seekers were thought to have come to California by 1855, and that's from all over the world, in addition to tens of thousands of Mexicans, Britons, Chinese, Australians, French, Latin Americans. There were, of course, smaller groups, including African Americans, Filipinos, Basques, Turks, but yes, the majority were Americans. Well, among the first people to permanently settle in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada were people from small villages in the hills close to Genoa, Italy. They brought with them traditional agricultural skills they developed to withstand the harsh winters. There were likely fewer than 4,000 miners of African descent who had traveled from Brazil, the Caribbean, and the southern states. In 1849 to 1850, a few hundred Chinese had come to California, and in 1852 over 20,000 of them had reached San Francisco. Of course, in the goldfields they were easily recognized by their unique attire and appearance. You must remember back then, it was part of the Qing dynasty, and they all had to have the long hair as a requirement that the ruling class had put upon all non-Manchus. So it was pretty easy to spot a Chinese person anywhere, until about 1912, where they had their revolution. Of course, they endured brutal racism from the miners, who directed their resentment towards foreigners. This caused them great suffering, especially when a Chinese miner managed to find some gold. You would bet the people did not like that. And somewhat out of jealousy, they'd take it out on the rest of the community. And this isn't just to say that this is just the normal American miners. It was pretty much everybody. That's just the way that the world was back then. Now, women, of course, participated in the gold rush as well, but they were comparatively few in number. In fact, just 700 of the 40,000 people who came to San Francisco Bay by ship in 1849 were women, and that includes the rich, the entrepreneurs, the single, the married, and those women who wanted to practice their craft in the saloons. There's more than one way to make money on the goldfields. They came for different reasons, of course. Some with their husbands, because they didn't want to be left on their own. Some came because their husbands sent for them. And some came just simply for the adventure and the money. Numerous women, of course, became widows before even seeing California, and many people perished from the trail from cholera, fever, accidents, and a host of other calamities. And so in California was not often to encounter these widows as a result of mining disputes as well. Women who had the opportunity to escape their traditional jobs in the goldfields also took that opportunity. And so the California goldfields were somewhat lawless at the start of the gold rush. California was a bit of a new frontier occupied by American forces after the Mexican-American War, but it was still officially part of Mexico when gold was found at Sutter's mill. Although California was part of the United States after the treaty ending the war signed on February 2nd, 1848, it was not actually recognized as an official territory until September 9th, 1850. It was in a unique position of being a territory under military control, not quite consolidated yet, and the entire region lacked a civil legislature or even a judiciary. Locals followed a convoluted and shifting set of American values, Mexican laws, and a lot of the time simply their own personal preferences. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and other federal laws were not strictly enforced, which facilitated the influx of escaped slaves into the territory. Of course, nearly all of the goldfields were outside of Mexican land grants, despite the United States' obligation to respect them under the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War. Rather, the majority of goldfields were situated on public land, which is officially owned by the US government. But there were still no established laws or effective ways to enforce them. Of course, this pretty much means that for the initial stage, the initial waves of immigrants coming to California, that it was pretty much, well, it was a free-for-all. No taxes, no license fees, not even any private property in the early goldfields. I mean, formally, the miners did adopt a few mining laws from Mexico. A claim could be staked by a prospector, but it was only valid while it was actively being worked. If you left the site, well, someone could just jump right in the hole and, well, just continue from where you left off. Of course, this, as you can imagine, caused more than a few arguments. You see, miners only spent enough time at a claim to assess its potential. They would leave the site in pursuit of a better one if they judged it to be of low value, which was the case for the majority. The other miners would, of course, claim jump the land if a claim was left untended or unworked. Claim jumping was when a miner started operations on a site that had already been claimed. Conflicts were frequently resolved violently, and occasionally they were arbitrated by groups of prospectors. There was, of course, ethnic tensions, as one can imagine. Due to simple pressure, the large number of prospectors in some areas may have caused the size of the current claim to decrease. Early 49ers were able to pan for gold in rivers and streams, or to use their hands to pick up loose gold flakes and nuggets due to the rich concentration of gold in the California gravel beds. Hard-working miners and groups of miners advancing to placer mining employed cradles and rockers or long toms to process greater amounts of gravel, since the panning was just not large enough. Coyoteing was another technique used by the miners, which entailed excavating a shaft 6 to 13 meters deep, about 20 to 43 feet, into placer deposits alongside a stream. The richest pay dirt veins were then reached by digging tunnels in every direction. Once again, dangerous work. Groups of prospectors would divert a river's water flow into a sluice alongside the river, and then excavate for gold in the newly exposed river bottom in the most intricate form of placer mining. According to current estimates, during the first 5 years of the gold rush, up to 12 million ounces, or 370 tons thereabouts of gold, were actually extracted. In the following phase, hydraulic mining was applied to old gravel beds that contained gold on bluffs or on hillsides by 1853. High-pressure hose directed a strong stream of jet water at gravel beds that held gold in contemporary form of hydraulic mining that first was invented in California and subsequently used all over the world. The gold would then settle to the bottom, where it was collected after the loose gravel and gold passed over the sluices. Hydraulic mining is thought to have recovered 11 million troy ounces, or 340 tons of gold by the mid-1880s, which is equivalent to about 15 billion US dollars in modern prices. Larger volumes of silt, gravel, heavy metals, and other contaminants entered streams and rivers as a result of these extraction techniques. California hydraulic mining was restricted by court decisions and federal legislation between 1882 and 1893. In fact, as of 1999, the effects of hydraulic mining are still visible in many places because the exposed earth and downstream gravel deposits left behind are frankly unsuitable for any plant life, not to mention agricultural problems. Gold recovery operations continued after the end of the gold rush, prospecting for gold that had been gradually washed down into a flat river bottom and sandbars of California's Central Valley and other gold-bearing regions of the state. Lying Scott Valley in Siskiyou County was the last step in recovering loose gold. And then towards the end of the 1890s, dredging technology, which was also invented in California for the specific purpose, and it's estimated that had recovered over 20 million troy ounces, or 620 tons of gold. Gold seekers also participated in hard rock mining during the gold rush and in the decades that followed. This method involves taking the gold straight out of the rock that contained it, usually quartz, usually by blasting and digging to find and remove veins of the quartz that contain gold. When the gold-bearing rocks were brought to the surface, they were crushed, and the gold was separated either by washing the sand over copper plates coated with mercury, with which gold forms an amalgam, or by separating gold in water. The amalgamation process resulted in mercury loss, which of course contaminates the environment. I mean, the mercury has to go somewhere, doesn't it? Well, eventually the hard rock mining emerged as the gold country's main source of gold production, and an estimated of 3,700 tons have been produced in California since that time. During the gold rush, some merchants earned significantly more money than the actual miners. In the early years of the rush, Samuel Brannan, a tireless newspaper publisher, shopkeeper, and self-promoter, was the richest man in California. In the goldfields, Brannan established the first supply stores in Sacramento, Coloma, and other locations. He bought all the prospecting equipment in San Francisco just before the rush started, and he sold it for a pretty good profit. Some people who were looking for gold, though, did manage to make quite a lot of money. According to some economic historians, the white miners were more successful than the blacks, Indians, or Chinese miners, and on average half of the gold seekers turned a small profit, at least after accounting for their costs. But then there were the taxes that just ruined everything. Like the 1851 California Foreign Miners Tax, that was targeted mainly at Latino miners and prevented them from earning as much as white miners who were actually exempt from the taxes. Now that's not fair. The majority of the late arrivals in California either made very little or lost money. In a similar vein, numerous unfortunate traders established themselves in communities that either vanished or perished in one of the devastating fires that ravaged the newly formed towns. And then we got Levi Strauss, on the other hand, who was a businessman who started selling denim overalls in San Francisco. Around 1853, achieved quite considerable success. Of course, we still got Levi's around today. In retail, shipping, entertainment, lodging, or transportation, other entrepreneurs made significant profits. The highly lucrative industries of boarding houses, food preparation, sewing, and laundry were frequently operated by married, single, or widowed women who recognized that men would be willing to pay a woman for her services while they were out chasing the gold. Large profits were also made by brothels, particularly when paired with gambling establishments and saloons. The state of the economy had drastically changed by 1855. Only medium to large groups of workers, either as employees or in partnerships, could profitably recover gold from the goldfields. The proprietors of these gold mining businesses were the ones who benefited financially by the middle of the 1850s. Additionally, California's economy and population had grown sufficiently, and it was at this point incredibly diverse, enough size to generate revenue from a wide range of traditional ventures. The gold itself took a variety of routes when it was extracted. Initially, a large portion of the gold was spent locally to buy miners' food, supplies, and housing. Additionally, it was used for entertainment, which included everything from a traveling theater to gambling, alcohol, and of course, those more physical entertainments. Frequently, the freshly recovered gold, which had been meticulously weighed, was used in these transactions. The gold was then used by the merchants and vendors to buy supplies from packers or ship captains who were transporting the goods to California. After that, the gold traveled from California to the manufacturers of goods worldwide, either via mules or via ships. The second route was taken by the Argonauts themselves, who either sent the gold home or brought their hard-earned diggings back with them after personally obtaining a sizable quantity. For instance, it is estimated that French prospectors and merchants sent about US $2.6 billion worth of today's conversion, worth of California gold back to France. Of course, most of it just returned to the brokerage houses back in New York City, where the serious business was done. Local banks and gold dealers issued banknotes or drafts, paper money that was accepted in the area, in exchange for gold as the gold rush went on, and private mints produced their own gold coins. Gold bullion was converted into official US gold coins for circulation in 1854 with the establishment of the San Francisco Mint. In order to use the gold in the booming California economy, California banks later sent it to national banks in the United States in exchange for national paper money. And so, just like that, from a sleepy little-known backwater town to the world's most formidable destination for hundreds of thousands of people. That is how California was transformed by the gold rush. The newcomers frequently displayed this exceptional civic-mindedness and inventiveness, bringing all of the good things, and sometimes the bad things about their home countries, to the New World. For instance, during the gold rush, cities and towns were incorporated, a state constitutional convention was called, a state constitution was drafted, elections were conducted, and delegates were dispatched to Washington, D.C. to negotiate California's new statehood. It was during this period that California's second gold rush, i.e. not actual gold, but large-scale agriculture, had begun. Almost immediately, roads, churches, schools, and all kinds of civic associations were established. Americans made up the great majority of the immigrants, and California then became the 31st state of the United States on the 9th of September, 1850. As a result of growing pressure, of course, from the improved political communication ties with the rest of the country, it can no longer be ignored. As for San Francisco, their population grew from 500 to 150,000, and that's just between the years of 1847 and 1870. Transportation between California and the East Coast greatly enhanced as a result of the gold rush's wealth and population. In 1855, the Panama Railway was completed, crossing the Panama Isthmus. Steamships, such as those owned by the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, started operating regularly between San Francisco and Panama. From there, mail, passengers, and cargo would board steamships bound for the East Coast, after crossing the isthmus by train. But of course, it all had negative effects too, both on the environment and on people, some of which you might not see coming. You see, due to fish mortality and habitat destruction caused by gravel, silt, and the chemicals from prospecting operations, Native Americans who relied on traditional hunting, gathering, and farming suffered from malnutrition and disease. Due to the construction of gold camps and other settlements in the middle of game and food gathering areas, the mining boom also caused these areas to vanish. Native Americans lost more land as farming expanded later to supply the settlers' camps. Tribespeople living on or close to mining districts were always a target of organized attacks in certain places. Native Americans and settlers engaged in a number of conflicts, and they were frequently viewed by miners as obstacles to their success. According to Marshall Gold Discovery State Historic Park interpretive lead Ed Allen, miners occasionally killed as many as 50 native people in a single day. Larger-scale attacks against native populations, sometimes tribes or villages not even involved in the initial act, may follow retaliatory attacks on lone miners. A group of settlers attacked a band of Windu Indians during the Bridge Gulch Massacre in 1852, after a citizen was killed. This was one J.R. Anderson, and following his murder, the local sheriff organized a squad of men to find the Indians, and when they found them, they killed over 150. The problem was, these were a completely different band of Windu that had killed Anderson, and out of all the village, only 3 children had made it out alive. Now, between 1846 and 73, non-Indians killed between 9,500 to 16,000 California Indians, according to one historian, Benjamin Madley. The majority of these massacres, which are defined as the intentional killing of 5 or more disarmed combatants, or largely unarmed non-combatants, including women, children, and prisoners, whether in the context of battle or otherwise, took place during this time. The killings were the main reasons why California's indigenous population dropped below 20,000 between 1849 and 1890. The California governor estimates that between 1849 and 1870, 4,500 Native Americans were killed in other violent crimes. In addition, California opposed ratifying the 18 treaties that federal agents and tribal leaders had actually signed in 1851. Then there were the death squads, financed and supported by the state government, which appropriated more than $1 million to support the paramilitaries' operations in support of mining operations. California's first governor, Peter Burnett, stated that the state was a battlefield between races, and that the only options for dealing with the California Indians was either removal or eradication. He stated that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the two races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. Burnett, like many of his contemporaries, believed that genocide was just a necessary part of the plan, and that his constituency in California had to move forward, even though they could not predict the outcome with anything other than pain and regret. In addition to Native Americans, foreigners, particularly Chinese and Latin American immigrants from Sonora, Mexico, and Chile, were pushed out of the mines by laws, unfair taxation, and overtly anti-foreign attacks after the initial boom had ended. The death and crime rates following the gold rush were exceptionally high, and the ensuing vigilantism also had a significant negative impact on the American immigrants, as 1 in 12 49ers ended up dying, with empty pockets at that. All right, and with that, we reach the end of the California Gold Rush. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit depressing towards the end there, but, well, what do you want me to do? I'd like to thank the top-tier supporters: Dark, Gary, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fazabo, Legitmus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Cameron, Alexander, Nicholas, Daniel, JR, Charlene, Christopher, and Lynn. Thank you all so much. And thank you for joining me today. I will see you in the next video. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.